Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into the life of Zenaida Joseph Campos, or Joe Campos as most knew him.
That's right. We've got these amazing transcripts, conversations with Joe and his wife Christina, which give us such a personal look.
Yeah, they really do. And our mission, I guess, is to understand his whole journey, the work he did, the impact he had. He's been called an American freedom fighter for democracy, so there's a lot to unpack there.
Definitely. It's quite a story. You get these glimpses into, well, just how much one person can commit and also the complexities of, international labor movements back then. These transcripts are gold.
Absolutely. Just
Wow.
imagine this arc, growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, in a close-knit Mexican-American community.
hmm
And then suddenly, he's on the front lines in Latin America during the Cold War, working with labor unions. It's quite a leap.
It really is. Well, look at his early life, his time in the Navy, how he got into this international labor work, and crucially, the part his wife Christina played.
Yeah, her role seems huge. So yeah, get ready for a deep dive into a life spent fighting for workers' rights, for democratic values.
Let's do it.
Okay, so Omaha. He was born there November 23, 1934. And interestingly, he was first generation born in the U.S. His parents came from Mexico.
Right. And that fact alone tells you something, doesn't it? Growing up straddling those two cultures, especially back then.
Yeah, you have to think that gave him a unique viewpoint, maybe more aware of the challenges immigrant communities faced.
I think so. It sets a foundation for his later focus on, social justice.
And he grew up really involved in the Mexican-American community around Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish. Sounds like a very supportive, tight-knit place.
That kind of environment often builds that sense of solidarity, resilience, important values, especially when facing prejudice.
And it seems like that experience, that sort of collective strength, probably informed his later work, organizing workers across different cultures.
Makes sense. He understood community power from the ground up.
So here's an interesting early story. He talked about facing discrimination in South Omaha,
Uh-huh. Not surprising for the time, sadly.
but his response was pretty cool. Instead of just accepting it, he formed a basketball team to kind of bridge the gaps.
Wow, that's really insightful, isn't it? Using sport, something shared to break down barriers. Shows a knack for connecting people early on.
Yeah, he put it like this. Everybody lived in South Omaha. Every nationality had their own churches,
Mm.
their own areas. It's one of the reasons we formed a basketball team, because there was discrimination against all immigrants.
It's practical ingenuity, finding common ground. That's a theme you see later, too.
Definitely. A little sign of the organizer he'd become.
Absolutely. Spot the problem, find a solution that builds unity. Classic leadership.
Okay, moving on. After high school, he joined the Navy, served from 55 to 57.
Right, and that experience seems to have really opened his eyes, taken him beyond Omaha.
Yeah, military service often does that, doesn't it? Discipline, seeing more of the world. The transcripts suggest it was pretty formative.
He said something like, "The Navy opened my eyes, taught me discipline, responsibility, teamwork. Those lessons carried with me."
You can see how those qualities, discipline, teamwork, would be vital for organizing later.
Exactly. And being exposed to different kinds of people in the Navy probably helped him appreciate diverse cultures, which was obviously crucial for his international work.
It seems like it gave him a real sense of, maybe, duty. And when he came back to Omaha, he poured that into the labor movement.
Yeah, that transition makes sense. Still serving a cause, but now focused on workers in his own community.
Okay, let's talk about his personal life a bit. He married Christina in 1959.
Ah, yes, the blind date story.
Right, classic. They met on a blind date, but it turns out they only lived 3 blocks apart. Knew each other vaguely from high school.
Sometimes it happens like that, doesn't it? That shared background probably made things click faster.
Seems like it was instant. Christina said, "We lived about 3 blocks apart. I thought he was so cute and he was so sweet."
Ah, that word sweet, it hints at that compassion, maybe, that drove his work later.
Yeah, I think so. So they get married, start a family, and this is also when Joe's really getting involved in the Omaha labor scene. This period, 59 to 67, seems key.
Absolutely. These are the years he's learning the ropes, seeing union power up close, and we should remember his family background here, too.
Right, the meatpacking connection.
Yeah, he said parents, grandparents on both sides of the family. It wasn't abstract for him.
No, it was lived experience, his family's reality.
Mm,
That must have been a huge motivator.
definitely. That firsthand understanding of working class struggle.
So he gets active in Local 8 of the United Packing House Workers, works his way up, serves on the executive board, even becomes VP of the central labor body.
Yeah, that quick rise tells you something. He clearly had leadership skills. People trusted him.
He mentioned it pretty directly. I got active, elected to the executive board, went beyond that, and got elected as vice president of the central labor body. That Omaha experience was the training ground.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Learning the nuts and bolts of union work, negotiating, dealing with all the dynamics, skills he'd definitely need later.
And then comes the big shift, 1968. He gets an invitation from Leo Perez at the AFL-CIO.
Right, the big labor federation, to work with AIFLD, the American Institute for Free Labor Development.
This is the pivot point, isn't it? From local Omaha stuff to the international stage.
It really is. And it's tied into the whole Cold War context,
Yeah.
the role of labor movements in that big ideological fight.
Joe actually admitted he didn't even know what AIFLD was at first.
Huh, really?
Yeah, he said Perez asked if he spoke Spanish, then asked if he'd be interested. Joe was like, AIFLD, what's that? So Perez set up a meeting in D.C.
Shows his reputation must have already reached beyond Omaha, even if he wasn't aware of this specific group. They sought him out.
Seems like it. So he goes to D.C., gets trained, and then his first assignment is Ecuador in 1967. And crucially, he takes the family.
That's a massive decision. Uprooting everyone, moving to a whole new country, speaks volumes about him and Christina, their partnership.
He described it very matter-of-factly. I was sent home, gathered my wife and children, sell my house, assigned to Ecuador for my first tour. Just like that.
Wow. And his work there started with education programs, co-ops.
Yeah, working with the Confederation of Workers. And the goal was pretty clear from the start.
What do you say about that?
He said, we were doing education programs, trying to prevent the growth of communist labor influence. We wanted to help them learn their rights and how to organize.
Okay, so right away, it's framed within that Cold War competition. Countering communist influence by promoting democratic unions.
Exactly. Which brings us perfectly to Christina, her role in all this.
Yes.
Yeah.
You really can't tell Joe's story without her. The support, the sacrifices, immense.
Totally. The transcripts really highlight her strengths. This wasn't just Joe's mission. It was their life.
Think about it, leaving everything behind in Omaha, family, friends, everything familiar.
She said, I left behind my parents, my siblings, my whole life. We packed up and went wherever Joe's work took us. It wasn't easy, but I believed in what he was fighting for.
That's powerful. Just the sheer commitment. And she knew the risks, right?
Oh, absolutely. She was very aware of the dangers in these politically unstable places.
Yeah, organizing independent unions and dictatorships, that's putting yourself right in the line of fire. The constant worry she must have felt.
But somehow, she held it all together, built a community, provided stability for the family, even in really challenging situations. An unsung hero, for sure.
Absolutely vital. Creating that stable home base allowed Joe to do that incredibly risky work.
She admitted, there were times when we feared for our lives. I would lie awake worrying, but I also knew that if we gave up, all the sacrifices would be in vain. We couldn't let that happen.
Wow. That just shows the depth of their shared purpose, doesn't it? Facing fear, but sticking to the mission.
Yeah. So moving into the 70s, the work gets even more intense. El Salvador.
Right. And this is deep in the Cold War context. Joe was very explicit about seeing their work that way.
He absolutely was. He said, we were known as Cold War warriors, freedom fighters. And he explained the goal. It was competing against the influence of the communist infiltrations. It was a Cold War.
Yeah.
Us against communism, one of the goals was to prevent the growth of the communist labor movement.
That framing is unmistakable. They saw themselves on the front lines of that ideological battle. Reader's Digest even called them blue-collar freedom fighters.
That's quite a label. Captures that idea of working directly with people on the ground, promoting democracy as an alternative.
Mm-hmm. And the core focus was helping establish democratic unions, right? Unions elected by workers, not controlled by the state or political parties.
Exactly, he stressed that. Offering to have unions like the AFL-CIO where they would be democratically elected and represent the workers, not a political machine.
That distinction was key, real grassroots empowerment versus political control.
But man, the danger involved. He talked about it openly, especially the opposition from powerful landowners.
Yeah, he said, I worked with independent unions. Naturally, it was very dangerous because the landowners didn't want any part of them. They had so much power and they fought back hard.
And tragically, that fight often turned deadly. Joe spoke about losing friends, labor leaders, to assassination.
It's chilling. He mentioned a number, didn't he?
Yeah, he said, I think I must have had about 20 labor leaders, friends of mine, assassinated, usually assassinated by right-wing dictators. 20 people.
Just staggering. The human cost of that work. You can feel the weight of it in his words.
He really wrestled with it, the grief, the responsibility.
What did he say?
He talked about families coming to him after an assassination saying, "You pushed him. What are you going to do for my family now? Was I
Mm.
complicit in it? Yeah. Did I
Mm.
encourage it? Yeah." Just incredibly raw and honest about the burden.
Unimaginable. The ethical weight of encouraging people to take risks that could get them killed.
Yeah. So later in the 70s, he's in Paraguay, then Chile. More dictatorships, more danger.
The pattern continues, doesn't it? Going to these really tough places, advocating for workers' rights against repressive regimes.
And in Chile, under Pinochet, he did something pretty remarkable. He helped organize the Group of 10.
Right, this coalition of labor leaders that became the main opposition to Pinochet.
Yeah. And apparently he became known as a folk hero among people there for doing that.
That's incredible. Organizing effective opposition under a brutal military dictatorship like Pinochet's, that takes immense courage and skill. Being called a folk hero tells you the impact he had.
He described them as labor leaders representing various unions, the main opposition to the general, directly challenging the regime.
Which, of course, put him in even greater personal danger.
Absolutely. He acknowledged being threatened, saying, "I was threatened certain times overseas. I wouldn't tell her Christina that."
Protecting her from the full extent of it.
Yeah. And he even recounted the U.S. ambassador telling him point blank, "It's time to get out of this country because you're in trouble. You're in danger."
Wow. That's about as serious as it gets. A direct warning from the ambassador.
But even with all that risk, his focus stayed on building for the future. He actually went to Harvard in 1980 for a labor program.
Still learning, still honing his skills. That commitment to always improving his approach is impressive.
And a lot of his work was with rural communities, right?
Yeah.
Campesinos facing really harsh oppression from landowners.
Yes, things like being thrown in jail arbitrarily. He even mentioned,
He was jailed himself.
yeah, he said, I was put in jail for various things. Experiencing that injustice firsthand must have just fueled his determination.
You'd think so. He talked about the landowners' tactics blocking water rights, blocking roads, intimidation.
And escalating to assassination if the intimidation didn't work. Grim stuff.
He also developed a pretty clear view of the U.S. Embassy's role in all this, how it tied into foreign policy.
What was his take on that?
He observed how aid and programs were often tied to accepting U.S. foreign policy objectives, saying something like, it was the U.S. Embassy who told them, "This is our program. If you accept our money, you accept this program because that's part of America's foreign policy."
So, navigating those complex geopolitical realities was part of the job, too. International labor work wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Definitely not. And another really important point, he specifically recognized the role of women in the campesino movement.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
He saw them as incredibly strong, saying the women were a real important component because the women are tougher than men. The women played a real important role. And he actually set up specific projects just for them.
That's fantastic. Recognizing their strength and actively working to empower them shows a really nuanced understanding of grassroots organizing.
Yeah. And throughout it all, he never forgot the people who were lost. He spoke about Mike Hammer, a colleague assassinated.
The personal toll again, these weren't just colleagues, they were friends in incredibly dangerous situations.
And his compassion went beyond words. He took in the son of an assassinated colleague from Honduras for 2 years.
Wow. Actually took him into his own family.
Yeah, and baptized the man's daughter too. Just incredible acts of solidarity.
That really speaks volumes about his character, doesn't it? A deep human commitment.
Absolutely. And underpinning everything was this unwavering belief in the labor movement, in democracy, in human rights.
That conviction, especially after seeing so much hardship and violence, is pretty remarkable.
And he was careful about how change should happen. He always stressed respecting local cultures.
Right, not imposing ideas from the outside.
Exactly. He said, we cannot impose democracy. We can show it. But in the end, it's their decision, not mine.
That's really wise. True change has to come from within, respecting their agency.
Looking back, he seemed pretty humble about his own role, seeing it as just planting seeds.
Yeah, that idea of long-term impact. You do the work, but you might not see the full results right away. It's about the future.
He did mention Paraguay, though. Seeing it transition from dictatorship to democracy during his time there, he took some pride in that.
And rightly so. That's a tangible result of the kind of work he and others were doing, giving people hope, fighting for their rights.
Yeah, he said his work was about giving people hope for a better life and protecting their rights. That feels like the heart of his legacy.
I agree. It's the hope he instilled, the groundwork he laid for justice and democracy that really endures.
So wrapping up this deep dive on Joe Campos, What a journey. Omaha to Latin America, decades of struggle.
An incredible life, dedicated to workers' rights, a real Cold War warrior for democracy, but facing immense risks and losses along the way. His impact was profound.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How one person's commitment, sticking to their values despite everything, can actually contribute to big societal changes. How it can spark hope even in the toughest fights for basic human rights. What part of his story really sticks with you?